81. That's how many days since Lorna drove west with her children and her last $50, the truck coughing black smoke as she passed the sign for Ponder Springs, Wyoming. She'd told herself it wasn't running from her husband, just driving until something changed. It was late April, though the land still held winter like a grudge. Snow crusted the tops of the distant hills, and the wind whipped through the valley sharp as judgment. The town was small. One gas station with broken lights, a diner with no name, and a post office that leaned like it had given up. Beyond that, grassland's fence posts worn silver by time, and the sky wide and hard as glass. She was parked outside the church, the youngest boy asleep on her shoulder, the twins chasing each other in the bare field behind the chapel. Her hands, calloused, already gripped the wheel, though the engine had been off 10 minutes. Her eyes were fixed on the clouds gathering in the north. They rose like bruises, and she could feel it in her bones, one of those storms that had teeth. A knock on the glass. She jumped. The man on the other side wore a broad hat and a coat too thin for the cold. He didn't smile, just nodded and motioned toward the sky. "You're gonna want shelter," he said when she opened the door. His voice was slow and certain. "That storm'll make roads disappear." She blinked at him, wary. "I've nowhere to go." He looked at the kids. Looked at her again. "I've got a ranch 3 miles out. You can stay in the hayloft. It's dry. Warm enough." She hesitated. He waited, unmoving. The wind picked up. A trash can skittered down the road behind him. She nodded. They followed his battered truck out of town, down a dirt road that rattled her teeth. It twisted through low hills and barbed wire fences. Eventually a wooden house came into view, sun-bleached and stubborn against the wind. A barn loomed behind it, red paint flaking, one window boarded up. Inside it smelled of horses and old straw. The twins climbed the ladder before she could stop them, laughing as if they'd never lived in a place with walls before. She laid the youngest down on a nest of blankets. The cowboy didn't say much. Just brought in a kerosene lamp and a can of soup. "I'm Micah," he said finally. "You're safe here. That's all you need to know tonight." Then he left, and Lorna sat alone in the dark with the wind howling around the barn, her children breathing soft as kittens, and something she hadn't felt in months tightening in her chest. Not comfort, not trust, just the first edge of it. The storm lasted 3 days. Rain came first, sharp and slanted, slapping the barn roof like an argument. Then the snow returned, fat, wet flakes that melted into muck by noon and froze solid by nightfall. The wind shrieked like it was mourning something, and in the mornings the fence lines had disappeared under white. Micah didn't come inside the barn unless he had to. He brought firewood, food, and once a pair of boots for the twins when their sneakers gave out. He never stayed longer than needed. Lorna wondered if he didn't trust her, or if he just knew better than to ask questions a woman might not be ready to answer. She kept to herself. Cooked on a camp stove he left. Made the kids gather dry straw and sweep the loft. At night, when the boys were curled up together, she'd sit by the lantern and watch the wind move outside the slats in the barn wall. By the second morning, the smallest boy, Jamie, started coughing. It was nothing at first, but Lorna knew how quickly that could change. She'd buried her sister's boy after a cold turned too fast, too cruel. So she carried Jamie across the yard in her arms and knocked on Micah's door for the first time. He didn't ask what was wrong, just stepped aside and let her in. The house was simple. One room with a stove, a table, a narrow bed, and a rocking chair worn smooth on the arms. A fire popped in the hearth. She laid Jamie on the couch, peeled off his wet clothes, and wrapped him in a thick quilt. Micah handed her a bottle of medicine, cough syrup half full, and left her alone. That night she didn't go back to the barn. She stayed by the fire, watching the child's chest rise and fall, feeling the heat return to his cheek. Micah slept in the chair without complaint. He didn't look uncomfortable, just still like he'd learned how to pass the hours without needing much. By morning, Jamie's breathing eased. Lorna stood at the stove stirring oats, while the other boys played with a box of old wooden animals Micah had pulled down from a shelf. She didn't ask why he had toys in a house with no children. She figured he'd tell her if he ever wanted to. "I used to come here as a girl," she said, surprising herself. "My gran lived in Pindalale. Summers, mostly. I remember the smell of sage and cattle and the way the sky made you feel smaller than you thought you were." Micah looked up from the corner where he was mending a leather strap. "You left home." "I left something," she said. "Home don't feel like the right word for it." The silence that followed wasn't cold, just quiet. Later, she helped him carry water from the pump and stack firewood. Her hands cracked from the cold and her back ached from crouching, but she welcomed it. The ache made her feel real again. The third night they sat across the table drinking weak coffee. Micah finally spoke more than a few words. "My brother owned this place," he said. "Died 2 winters ago. I didn't want it, but I didn't want anyone else tearing it down either. So I stayed." She nodded. "And the toys?" His eyes dropped to his cup. "He had a boy. Didn't make it past 5. Pneumonia. The kind that comes fast." Her breath caught. She looked toward Jamie asleep by the fire. Micah saw the look on her face and shook his head gently. "He's strong. He'll be all right." Outside, the wind had died down. The snow had stopped. A stillness settled over the land like the world was holding its breath. Lorna wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders and looked at this man across from her. He wasn't gentle, not in a soft way, but there was something else, something quieter, solid. She didn't trust it yet, but she didn't flinch from it either. If this story stayed with you longer than the dust on your boots, subscribe and keep riding with us into the next hard-earned chapter. The thaw came slow. Snow turned to slush, slush to mud, and the fields began to breathe again. Lorna moved back to the barn, though Micah didn't ask her to. She just knew some things needed space. Pride lived in silence out here. You didn't thank a man for decency. It was expected, like feeding your stock or fixing a broken fence. But the kids kept wandering toward the house. The twins would offer to help feed the chickens or sweep the porch, and Jamie, now steady on his feet again, followed Micah around the property like a shadow. Micah didn't push them away. He didn't change how he spoke or carried himself either. He just worked. Quiet, methodical. Fixing broken hinges, hauling hay, checking the perimeter fence like it might fall apart if he stopped looking at it long enough. One morning, Lorna came out to find Micah teaching the boys how to saddle the old mare that lived in the back paddock. She was sway-backed and patient, more bone than muscle, but the twins were beaming, arguing over whose turn it was next. Jamie held a brush nearly his own size and mimicked Micah's movements with a seriousness that nearly broke her heart. That night, Lorna made supper. Real food, not just canned soup. Beans and bacon, a pan of cornbread, and boiled potatoes with salt. She brought it to the house and didn't ask if she was welcome. Micah nodded toward the table. "Smells better than anything I've burned lately." They ate in the kind of silence that doesn't ache. The boys talked enough for all of them, about the horse, about the jackrabbit they saw near the fence, about how they were going to build a fort in the barn. After they'd gone to bed, Lorna stayed back helping wash dishes. Micah handed her a towel. She dried each plate, slowly watching the steam rise from the basin. "Why'd you leave?" he asked, not looking at her. She paused, the towel stilled in her hands. "My husband had a way of making nothing feel like love. You know, he'd sit beside you, touch your arm, and you'd feel like air. Not even the kind that moves." Micah nodded. "Some men think keeping you small means they're strong. I stayed longer than I should. Told myself I was giving the boys a father. But you can't drink poison just because someone calls it water." He didn't say anything for a while. Just scraped the last bits from the pan, slow and steady. My mother left when I was 10, he said. My brother blamed her for everything after that. Said she broke us, but I think she just ran out of ways to be invisible. Lorna looked at him then. Really looked. There was grief in him, but not bitterness. Not anymore. Just a worn kind of acceptance, like a scar you stop hiding once you know it won't heal. I think, she said quietly, we both got left and stayed behind at the same time. Micah leaned against the counter, arms folded. That sounds about right. Outside, the wind had shifted again. Warmer, carrying the scent of damp earth and something faintly sweet, maybe the first hints of sage waking up under the thaw. Lorna walked back to the barn with the stars above her, bright and distant. She felt them pressing down, quiet and ancient, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel crushed beneath it. She felt part of it. By the time May rolled in, the ranch had shaken off winter like an old coat. Micah taught the boys to mend wire and check fence lines, and Lorna helped in the garden behind the house, turning soil with her sleeves rolled high. The earth was stubborn, packed and dry in places, but she liked the feel of it under her nails. It reminded her that things could grow again, even after too much cold. They worked side by side most days, not always talking, just moving in rhythm. He showed her how to hold a post steady, how to check a horse's hoof for stone, how to listen for weather and the sound of the wind. And she listened. She always had, but now it felt like something worth listening to. Sometimes he'd talk in small pieces, about his brother, about growing up here, about how he never meant to stay but never found reason enough to leave either. Once, while they were repairing a section of broken fence, he paused, one hand resting on a cedar post. I always figured I'd build something, he said. A family. Maybe a herd worth handing down. But after my nephew passed, after my brother went, it's like I didn't know how to want anything anymore. Just kept the gates from falling. Lorna didn't say anything, just handed him the next length of wire. She didn't push. She knew what it was like to carry grief like a sleeping child, quiet, heavy, and impossible to set down without waking everything that hurt. Later that evening, she found him sitting outside carving a piece of cedar with a pocket knife. The boys were asleep in the loft, and the stars were out again, sharp and clear in the open sky. You don't have to keep feeding us, she said gently, leaning against the porch rail. We'll be gone soon, once I find work. He looked up, the knife stilling in his hand. You got someone waiting? No. She thought of the letters she hadn't opened from the courthouse back home, the ones that probably spelled out custody hearings and divorce terms in dry legal language. She thought of her mother's tight voice on the phone. You've got 3 mouths to feed, Lorna. You can't afford pride. I don't know where we're going, she admitted. I just know we can't go back. Micah nodded slowly, eyes on the cedar shavings falling to the porch boards. You don't owe me anything, he said. But I don't want you rushing off just 'cause the weather turned. She felt a tightness in her chest then. Not fear, not grief. Hope. Small and dangerous. The next morning, everything changed. A truck pulled into the drive. White paint, tinted windows, Texas plates. Lorna froze when she saw it, heart slamming. She knew that truck. Micah stepped off the porch before the man inside had cut the engine. Lorna couldn't hear their voices, but she saw the tension, the way Micah's jaw clenched, the way the man pointed at the barn. Then Micah turned and called for her. Her feet moved before she could stop them. The man leaning against the truck wore polished boots and a smug smile. Well, he said, looking her over, didn't think I'd find you in a place like this. Lorna's voice caught in her throat. I'm here for my boys, he said. You can do whatever mess you want with your life, but they're mine. She felt the air leave her lungs. Micah stepped between them. You need to leave, he said flatly. The man laughed low and sharp. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows what those kids need. And it's not a man who only shows up when it's about control. You got no claim." Micah didn't move, didn't blink. "Neither do you. Not in this state. Not without papers." Lorna's hands were shaking. The man looked at her then, all the charm gone from his face. "Just steal." "I'll be back," he said. "And next time I'll have a sheriff?" The truck roared down the road, kicking up dust. Lorna stood silent. Micah didn't touch her, just waited. And when her knees finally gave, he caught her before she hit the ground. They didn't speak much that night. Lorna sat on the edge of the porch long after the kids were asleep, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. The stars were out again, but they felt too far away to matter. Micah sat beside her, not crowding her, not asking questions. The wind had picked up. It pressed against the boards low and steady like the hum of something waiting to break. Finally, she said, "He never hit me in front of them." That was his line. Made it worse somehow, knowing he could control it. Knowing it was a choice. Micah didn't answer right away. "Then that why you stayed so long?" She nodded. "Didn't want the boys to grow up in a broken home. Took me too long to see it was already broken." She stared out into the dark. "He'll come back. And this time he'll have the law behind him. Maybe even win." Micah leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Then we don't wait around hoping he won't. You talk to someone in town. We file papers, get you legal protection. I've got friends who will help." She turned toward him, searching his face. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes were steady. "Because I see what kind of mother you are. Because I see what kind of man he is." And because he hesitated, his voice low, like it cost him something to say it. "Because I don't want to watch you leave." The words settled between them like dust after a storm, soft but heavy. Lorna looked away, afraid of the warmth rising in her throat. Not fear this time. Something closer to longing. She went into town the next morning. The courthouse clerk gave her forms. The legal aid woman sat with her for 2 hours, gentle but firm. It would take time. Custody hearings. Proof. A lot of waiting and maybe some fighting. But it could be done. When she walked out, the kids were in the diner with Micah eating pancakes with their fingers. She watched them through the window for a long moment before going in. Micah looked up when the bell rang. He didn't smile, but there was something in his eyes, pride maybe, or relief. "Filed it," she said. "It started." He nodded. "Good." The next few days passed with a strange kind of stillness, like everything was paused, holding its breath. Lorna kept working, tending the garden, helping with the animals, but she felt it under her skin, a pull, a stretch between past and future. The boys were thriving. They moved like they belonged now. Their laughter rang out across the fields. Jamie had started calling the sway-backed mare Mabel and claimed she was his. One afternoon, while Lorna was fixing a broken hinge on the chicken coop, Micah walked up behind her. "I've been thinking," he said. "This place. I never planned to turn it into a family ranch again. But it don't feel empty anymore." She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "I ain't asking for anything you can't give," he said. I want you to know I'd be proud to build something here. With you, if it ever felt right." Lorna looked at him, this man who never rushed her, who never reached out too far, but who showed up every day solid as the earth under their feet. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running. She felt like staying. It wasn't over, of course. The man came back 3 weeks later, clean-shaven, smug, and holding a folded piece of paper with court stamps and signatures. He wore a sport coat-like armor and brought a deputy with him, this time a kid no older than 20, hat too big for his head, shifting from foot to foot like he'd rather be anywhere else. Lorna stood on the porch with Micah beside her, the twins peeking from the window behind her, Jamie clinging to her leg. The man smiled without warmth. "Told you I'd make it official." He held out the paper like a trophy. "Temporary custody hearing. You leave with me today or I file for full custody on grounds of evasion and instability." "That's abandonment, Lorna. You know what that word means to a judge." Micah didn't move. "You're not taking her." The deputy cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I'm not here to remove the children, but he has the right to serve the order. You're required to appear. And if you leave the county, it gets worse." Lorna reached out and took the paper. Her hands didn't shake this time. "All right," she said. "Then I'll be there." The man blinked, caught off guard. He opened his mouth to say something else, but she had already turned and gone inside. The court date came in June. She wore the only clean dress she had left, ironed flat with Micah's old press. He drove her to the courthouse, his hand resting near hers on the bench seat the whole way, but never quite touching. Inside, she spoke carefully, clearly. She told the judge about the drinking, the neglect, the nights locked in the bathroom while the children cried. She didn't raise her voice, didn't cry. Her ex talked about stability, about money, about what the boys needed. The judge listened to them both, frowning like the weight of the decision hurt her teeth. In the end, she granted Lorna temporary sole custody pending a full investigation. Outside the courtroom, Lorna stood on the sidewalk in the heat, letting it sink in. Micah was waiting across the street. She crossed slowly, the paper folded in her hand, and when she reached him, she didn't speak. Just leaned into him, breathing him in dust, sweat, leather, cedar, and let herself be held. For the first time, she didn't pull away. They drove home with the windows down, the boys asleep in the back dust, trailing behind them in soft gold clouds. That night, as the sun dropped low over the pasture and lit the hills with copper light, Micah brought out something small and carved. It was a tiny horse shaped from cedar, smooth as stone, in her hand. "I used to make these," he said, "for my nephew. Figured maybe Jamie could have one now." She turned it over, thumb resting along the grain. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for this. For everything." Micah studied her face for a moment. "You thinking of staying?" "I am," she said. "If you still want us." His smile was slow, shy even. "I never stopped." Later they sat with the kids on the porch, fireflies rising from the tall grass. Jamie clutched his cedar horse. The twins were curled up on either side of Micah, drowsy and full from supper. Lorna looked out over the land, rough, wild, and beautiful in the way of things that survived. She reached for Micah's hand. "We could build something here," she said. He didn't speak, just squeezed her fingers once, gentle and sure. And the stars came out, not distant anymore, but near, like lanterns hung just for them. Summer came hard and bright. The boys ran barefoot through the fields, dust between their toes, skin browned by the sun. Lorna kept a garden behind the barn, tomatoes, beans, zucchini, all stubborn little things that had to be coaxed out of the soil. She rose before dawn most days and worked until her back ached, but she didn't mind. Hard work was different from desperation. This was hers. Her calloused hands, her choices, her children safe under her roof. Micah built a swing from old rope and a plank of pine, hung it from the cottonwood tree beside the barn. Jamie squealed every time he swung out over the slope, legs kicking skyward. The twins helped Micah rebuild a chicken coop, hammering crooked nails and naming the hens after outlaws Belle, Jesse, Cole, and Doc. And at night, after the boys were asleep, Lorna and Micah sat out on the porch in silence, or in talk, depending on the kind of day it had been. Some nights he'd tell stories about his brother, how he once tried to saddle a half-wild colt drunk and broke 2 ribs. Other nights, Lorna told him about her old life, the good parts she missed and the parts she never would. They didn't talk about marriage. Didn't need to, not yet. But when Lorna hung laundry one morning and saw Micah's flannel shirts drying beside Jamie's overalls and her own skirt, she smiled. It looked like a life. Still, the past didn't disappear just because it lost its grip. One afternoon, a letter arrived, postmarked from Austin, her ex's lawyer. She opened it at the kitchen table, her fingers steady. A custody settlement offer, shared visitation, no contest, no threats. It was more concession than he'd ever made. Micah watched her read it. What does it mean? It means he's giving up the fight. Or at least the one that matters. He nodded. What'll you do? Lorna folded the paper slowly. Send him my terms. I'll let the boys talk to him when they're old enough to ask. Not before. She looked out the window where the boys were running wild in the pasture. They belong to the land now. You can see it. You can't fake that kind of peace. Micah didn't answer, but she saw it in his face, relief, respect, something quieter too. Later that week she took the boys into town for school enrollment. On the way back she bought a tin of paint. Pale blue. Said nothing when Micah raised his eyebrows. The next day she painted the barn door with the boys. The color was soft, like a sky just before sunrise. They dipped their brushes too deep, dripped paint everywhere, laughed too loud. But when they were done, the barn looked like something reborn. Micah walked up behind her, a streak of blue across his sleeve where Jamie had swatted him with a brush. Looks good, he said. Lorna wiped her hands on her jeans. Feels like ours now. That night, while the children slept, she sat beside Micah with a mug of coffee and her bare feet in his lap. The sky overhead was smeared with stars. You ever think, she said quietly, that some people are made to lose everything before they can build something worth keeping? Micah didn't answer right away. He rubbed a thumb along the arch of her foot, thoughtful. I think maybe some people just need land and time, and someone who sees them. Lorna turned toward him, the breeze lifting her hair. I see you. He met her gaze. I see you too. The screen door creaked open behind them. Jamie stood there, rubbing his eyes, the cedar horse clutched tight in one hand. Bad dream, he mumbled. Lorna opened her arms and he climbed into her lap, small and warm. Micah reached over and pulled the blanket around all three of them. They stayed that way under the stars, in the quiet hum of a life finally beginning to take root. The trail doesn't end when the screen goes dark. Subscribe and walk with us into the stories still waiting beyond the horizon.